So is this microphone working? Great. So thank you very much, Ariel and Danny, for inviting me here. It's great to be here. So it's kind of a tough act to follow after John Crowcroft. So humorous talk, so funny. So in order to distinguish myself, I thought I'll dress up like this to distinguish myself from him, to make sure there's no confusion. All right. So actually, that paper that he quoted us, Matthias Grosshauser and I, on mobility increases capacity. That was, when we wrote that paper, we thought it was a bit of like a joke. But then, surprisingly, 10, 12 years later, someone actually followed up with it and do something good with it. So we're really happy to see that. Anyway, today's talk has nothing to do with that piece of work. So this is the title of our talk. A lot of people came and asked me yesterday, what the hell do I mean by this talk? So to explain that a little bit better, I decided to add a few more words at the bottom in smaller font. The three words are the three concepts I want to talk about today: interference, feedback, and sign information. And you have to sit through to the end of the talk to understand what the connection between these three concepts are, and what's the connection between these three concepts and the title of the talk. Okay, one of my main research area is in physical layer wireless communication. So we have done quite a bit in the past 15 years. The spectral efficiency going from 2G to 3G has increased by roughly a factor of 8. From 3G to 4G, a few more folds. So we've done quite a bit in terms of improving the efficiency of our very expensive real estate, efficient use of our very expensive real estate, which is the spectrum. Much of the gain comes from really improving point-to-point efficiency, like coding and so forth, and also in terms of single-cell performance. So what are we doing now? Are we retiring because we've done so much? No, we don't retire. We're still working. And right now, the frontier in physical layer communication, I would say, is focused on understanding how to deal with interference. Because at the end of the day, when you improve point-to-point capacity, you're still limited by the interference between different wireless links. So we try to understand what are the good ways of dealing with that. So that's the interference barrier. The interference problem is just getting worse and worse because in old days, many wireless networks are coverage limited because nodes are sparse, very far away, and you don't have the power to get through to the nodes. Right now, the nodes are just getting denser and denser, so it becomes interference limited rather than coverage limited. Also, wireless architecture is now evolving from our standard cellular network architecture, regularly placed cell, very carefully managed interference, to very heterogeneous and decentralized architecture. For example, we have a mixture of cells, of macro cells and pico cells, and maybe femto cells, and they interfere with each other. For example, if you have a mobile device close to, within a pico cell and you want to get reception from a pico cell, well, it may just happen that you're close to the macro cell base station, and you get a lot of interference from that. And therefore, because these pico cells are randomly placed where the population density is, there's no guarantee that you can manage this interference by prior planning. So you get a lot of this situation. And a peer-to-peer network, for example, is an even worse situation where the transmitter of a different link could be very close to your receiver, much closer to your own transmitter by 20, 30 dB. So you get into a bad situation. So interference is a big problem. And the community has responded by looking at various techniques to deal with interference. Three techniques I want to briefly talk about is multi-user MIMO, network MIMO, and interference alignment. So multi-user MIMO, so I understand that this is a networking conference. So when I first arrived, the first word I saw was cloud. Okay, cloud. What I do has nothing much to do with the cloud. So I understand that the audience is a little bit more networking oriented. So I'm trying to make things simple by drawing a lot of pictures instead of equations. And here are my pictures, okay? So I just want to make sure I'm friendly, and you're friendly, and everyone's friendly. So the way to think about interference, one way to think about interference is the following. I am communicating in a time-frequency grid, okay? So on each resource is a time slot, time-frequency slot. Okay, so this is a resource that's shared between all the communicating users within the geographical area. Interference essentially says that when one guy transmits on that resource, another guy cannot transmit, and that's a problem. So to deal with interference, I want to hope to somehow allow multiple users to simultaneously use a resource so that the efficiency can be improved. So this is one example. Suppose I have a few cells, a few users, mobiles, within a cell. And originally, if the base station has only one antenna, let's say, then on each resource, I can only send to one user at a time, okay? However, if I have, say, 3 antennas, then I can do something intelligent. I can spatially share the same time frequency resource. So how do I do that? So here's my cartoon picture. You beamform to a user, and then you beamform to another user, and you beamform to a third user. And if there's enough spatial diversity, then you can send 3 beams so that you can simultaneously communicate to 3 users using the same time frequency resource, okay? So this is what we call multi-user MIMO, or also called space division multiple access. And this is one way of dealing with mitigating intra-cell interference. Intra-cell interference. Intra-cell means within a cell, okay? Now, you have used this technique to deal with what happens within a cell, but then you still have problem of interference between different cells. So this is now an inter-cell interference problem. Okay? So you still need to deal with that. And one technique that community came up with is so-called network MIMO, or you're familiar with LTE terminology. This is called COMP, coordinated multi-point. So the idea is that these guys, when you have transmission to these guys, they interfere with each other if they're close by. And therefore, you have inter-cell interference. So to avoid that, what you want to do is to have some kind of central unit, use a backhaul to link up these base stations to a central unit so that the whole system acts like a virtual multiple antenna system with 3 dimensions, 3 antennas, so that now you can use this gigantic macro array to do beamforming to the different users, and thereby do the same trick as we do in the intra-cell setting, and now shift it up to the inter-cell setting, and therefore reduces inter-cell interference, okay? Now, this is an expensive solution because it involves a lot of infrastructure, uses a lot of backhaul. As John Grocroft says, companies like Vodafone, they don't like to invest so much on the backhaul. So this is going to cost you a lot in terms of infrastructure. So a third technique that the community came up with is so-called interference alignment, and I'll explain a specific instance of interference alignment, so-called downlink interference alignment. So the idea is that you can actually do interference mitigation even without the base station cooperating through this infrastructure. And here is how, okay? So I'm just for sake of argument, I have here 2 cells, base station alpha and base station beta. So sorry, I'm not going to use too many equations in this talk, but I guess knee-jerk reaction dictates the fact that I'm still using Greek symbols to show that, I can do some math. There you go, alpha and beta, 2 Greek symbols here. And this is almost as far as we go, so don't worry. It won't get worse, All right, so here's the situation. I have 2 cells, and they're in close vicinity to each other. So on the same time frequency resource, you would expect that maybe only one cell can transmit at a time, okay? So I'm going to explain to you a trick of interference alignment, how I can do better than that without these 2 base stations cooperating. Okay, so the idea is the following. As we said, there are a lot of time frequency resources in the system. So let's look at 3 subcarriers. So think about this as an OFDM system, 3 subcarriers, or if you're a wireless networking person, high level, just think about these as 3 channels, so multi-channel communication. So I have 3 subcarriers. So for physical layer people, they like to draw these 3-dimensional pictures because, communication is happening in signal space. And here we have 3 subcarriers and therefore 3 dimension. And I'm going to show you how each cell can simultaneously use 2 out of 3 dimensions, right? This is winning, because that means these 2 cells are not exactly sharing these 3 dimensions. They have a total of 4 dimensions out of 3. So I'm winning. And let's see how I can win. So, well, okay, so the trick is that, the thing is that I'm going to use 2 dimensions. So each base station, whatever you transmit, you can think of as 2 signals in 2 different directions, but lying in a 2-dimensional plane. So using 2 out of 3 dimensions. And this is going to create interference at the other cell, at the other 2 mobile devices. So here's the interference that they create, okay? So now I have a bit of problem here because I want to propose to use 2 dimensions in this base station as well. But look, each receiver is receiving 2-dimensional interference, and there's only 1 dimension left. So how can I squeeze in 2 dimensions when there's only 1 dimension left? This sounds like a Herculean task, but actually it's not that difficult. So here's how. So I'm going to pick a signal direction for mobile device 1, okay? Now, the question is, what signal direction should I send, okay? So that mobile device 2 can also simultaneously get a signal direction from me, okay? So now I only have 3 dimensions at each mobile device, and mobile device 2, for example. 2 of them are occupied by interference already. Okay, so here's a quiz time. I always like to start with a quiz. What direction should I choose this vector in so that at mobile device 2 there's still room enough for my own signal, which I have not drawn yet? 180 degrees from the interference. Wait a minute. You're tricking me, right? 180 degrees is like inside the interference. Is that what you meant? 0 degrees and 180 degrees is the same thing, isn't it? Okay. So I assume what you're saying is correct? 360 is the same. No, 180 0 degrees is the same thing from my point of view, though. I'll see you one. So you're correct. No, whatever you mean, you're correct. Hey guys, the customer is always right. When I first got to Berkeley, the teaching coordinator told me, you know, the students are your customers, and they're always right, okay? That was what I was told, and so that's how I learned that. Anyway, so I'm going to take this vector, and I'm going to put it at 0 degrees or 180 degrees with respect to this interference plane. It's always possible because this plane will project into some plane here, and the intersection always have 1 dimension. I'll take that intersection. Why is that a good idea? Well, because then I have enough room to put the vector for user 2. Okay. So now the point is, though, that 1 get projected into here, but because these 2 planes have some random orientation with respect to each other, because there's a lot of diversity in this channel, therefore 1 itself will be linearly independent of the interference plane, and therefore 1 can hear himself despite the interference. So in basic thinking, as long as you have linear independency, then you can decode the signal. Okay? So we're done. So what have I done here? I have aligned the interference between the out-of-cell and the inter-cell interference. So there's the inter-cell interference of 2 dimensions. There's the intra-cell interference of 1 dimension. If they don't align, then there will be 3 dimensions. I have nothing left for my own signal. But by aligning them, I save 1 dimension, and therefore I have 1 dimension by myself. Okay? So therefore, I succeeded. Now you may say, what's the big deal? You only get 33% improvement. But look, suppose now there are K users. Suppose there are K users. Then you can do the same trick. And you can use a total of K plus 1 dimension, and you can use K of them. You can use K of them. Which means that as K becomes larger and larger, then you can get essentially interference-free performance. So this is one way of getting back to the interference-free performance, which means simultaneously these 2 cells can operate at the same time, at the same frequency, without interfering with each other effectively. Okay, so these are the ideas that we have as a community to go forward. But then it turns out that when one tries to think about implementing all these ideas, there's one big problem, one huge problem. The huge problem is that you need to know the knowledge about the channel at the transmitter. For example, if you want to implement multi-user MIMO, what do you need to do? You have your base station, you need to beamform to the 3 users. But think about it. If you need to beamform to 3 users, I need to know what the channels are before I know what direction to send to them to avoid interfering with the other 2 users. So I need to know all 3 users' channel. If I want to do network MIMO, the same thing, because I'm beamforming. Not only that, but I need to transport the channel information back from locally, the base stations, to the central unit to do my signal processing. Okay? Interference alignment, similar thing, is that if you need to align these interference, you need to know at the transmitter where the interference plane is and what the channel is going forward from the base station to the users. So you need a lot of channel information flying around. Okay? And that's a problem. And that's a problem. Because in a real system, in a real cellular system, many cellular systems are built on an FDD basis, frequency division duplex, which means that to get the channel information, only the receiver can actually measure it. The transmitter cannot directly measure it. The receiver can measure it and feed back to the transmitter. Feeding back takes time. In an LTE system, for example, it will take several milliseconds. And our channel typically varies quite badly. This is the nature of the wireless channel. So in several milliseconds, the channel may have changed significantly. And even worse, these alignment schemes or beamforming schemes require quite accurate, very accurate channel information. So even if you change it a little bit, you're off and your interference starts spilling over to the unintended user and you're in trouble. So we have a problem here. And so the current approach is say, well, if I don't know the channel exactly, maybe I can try to predict going forward. So to understand whether this approach is any good, we consult a Nobel laureate. And the Nobel laureate says, let's not try that. And in fact, in practice, this is what people see. That when you have all these fancy schemes, and you have mobility, like 5 miles per hour, or 5 kilometers per hour, 10 kilometers per hour, then these schemes sort of become very bad rather quickly. So it doesn't really work. So we start asking the question is that, well, what if the current channel, let's push it to the extreme, be a good theorist, what happens if the current channel is completely independent of the feedback information? So suppose your feedback delay is so long that the mobility makes your channel completely different. This is the extreme limit of that. In that case, the conventional wisdom would tell you the feedback is totally useless. The feedback about channel information is totally useless because by the time you got the information, the actual channel currently is completely different, and therefore whatever beamforming technique you want to use or interference alignment, it doesn't work anymore. So this is where we pause for the suspense, okay? Suspense, which is, well, okay, so feedback is totally useless for this prediction-based approach, okay? But Niels Bohr tells us, predicting the future is difficult. So the question is this a fundamental limitation of the whole situation? Or is it just a limitation of the prediction-based approach? Okay, so we, 1 or 2 years ago, we came up with an idea to understand this issue. So to do that, to understand this issue, I'll go through an example. I'll take 5-10 minutes to go through an example, very important example here. But I'm just going to focus on one of those 3 or 4 techniques that I talked about earlier, which is downlink MIMO. Once you understand that, then you can apply it to many different scenarios, okay? So now our claim is that actually, Niels Bohr is right. Don't try to predict. Do something else, and I'll explain to you what that something else is, okay? All right, so here's our downlink MIMO. So to warm up, first let's start with a case when you have perfect channel information, instantaneous perfect channel information. Okay, So in that picture I drew earlier, you would beamform to the two users. So let me be a little bit more specific what beamforming means. So we can think of, in this example, there are two antennas and one antenna at the mobile. So there is a channel gain one number here and the second number here. Two channel gains. Let's form a vector. Let's call it H2. So I assume networking people still is okay with linear algebra, right? Okay, no problem. Linear algebra. But in any case, this is Israel. Linear algebra is probably taught in like grade 5 or something like that. Okay? All right. Okay. All right. So there's my vector H2. Now if I want to beamform, okay, and I want to form a beam to user A, then what I'm trying to say mathematically is I'm trying to send a symbol A to receiver A, and I don't want this A to interfere with B. Well, algebraically, you want to send in a direction which is perpendicular to H2. That's it. So that A appears here and does not appear here. What's the advantage of that? Is that on the same time frequency resource, you can now send a B in a direction perpendicular to H1, and therefore B only shows up here and not here. So therefore, simultaneously, you can send to both user A and B, two symbols for two users. And therefore, you get a total of two symbols per time slot. Okay? Good? So this is exactly the math behind that beamforming picture that I drew. So now, what happens if you don't have any channel knowledge? Okay? So you have no channel knowledge at all. Then what can you do? Well, you don't know what H1, H2 is. You cannot figure out what direction perpendicular to whichever. So you might as well just send using, say, one antenna, a symbol A for user A, but then A annoyingly appear at the other receiver as well. It's useless for that receiver because he's not interested in A, he's only interested in B. There's no B, he throws it away. And so therefore, now you only get one symbol per time slot. And to send B, you have to use another time slot. Okay? So that's the problem. No channel information, no spatial multiplexing on the same time frequency degree. Okay, so now let's consider a third setup where at each time I don't know what the current channel is at all, but I do know what was the previous channel state. But the previous channel state has nothing to do with the current channel state. So the question is, can I still do something useful with this information? Okay? So I want to get beyond one symbol per time slot. So I'm going to be aggressive, right? Yesterday I was in a cab driver. He was driving at 60 miles per hour on high-flow roads. He was aggressive. So I'm aggressive here too. Okay. I got back to the hotel rather quickly, I must say. Okay. All right, so I'm trying to push two symbols. But I know it's impossible, but, you know, impossible is good. So this guy obtains a linear combination of A1, A2 through this vector H1. Let's call this linear combination capital A1. This guy got a linear combination A2. Useless, seemingly useless, because this is a linear combination of two symbols, A1, A2, which is intended for this receiver. This guy is not interested. Okay, so let's do the same thing for user B by sending two symbols on the two antennas, and you get two linear combination. Okay, so at this moment, this guy got one equation, let's call it equation, in the two information symbols. Can you solve for two variables with one equation? No. Okay? So you cannot. So an alternative would be send this guy another equation and send this guy another equation, but that would be 4 time slot for 4 symbols, and I'm back to the no channel knowledge case. So I want to do better than that. Okay? So to do better than that, I must somehow be more efficient in bringing another equation to receiver A. Do you see any equation lying around? Do you see any money on the table? what is another equation that will complement this equation, which will help this guy decode A1, A2? Well, you're too complicated because there are only 4 symbols here in this slide. So if I give you A2 to this guy, then he can decode, right? But A2 is in the wrong destination, unfortunately. So that doesn't really work. And similarly, if I give B1 to this guy, then he can decode. Okay? So the question is, can I actually bring these 2 things back to the respective receiver in a more efficient way than sending fresh equations? And the answer is yes. How? Because I have delay channel information after one time slot, outdated already, but I got the equation, I can actually reconstruct A2. Why? Because the transmitter, the base station, already knows the symbol A1, A2. So through the channel gains that I got in a delay fashion, I can reconstruct A2. So this is feedback to figure out A2. And similarly, I can figure out B1 in the 3rd time slot. So right now I'm on the 3rd time slot, but I already figured out what A2 and B1 is at the transmitter. Okay, so I claim now with 1 more transmission, not 2 more, I can simultaneously deliver A2 and B1 to the respective right owner. And to do that, I send A2 plus B1. How? So now I send A2 plus B1 through just one antenna, and just like the no channel knowledge case, both guys will receive some copy of A2 plus B1. Look, this guy already has B1, and therefore he can cancel B1 and get his A2. This guy already knows A2, and therefore can cancel and get B1. So I'm done. 3 transmission, 4 time slot. I got 4 with 3 symbols per time slot. 33% improvement. Okay? So even though the channel knowledge is completely outdated, no problem. So we generalize this to K antennas and K users, and we show that a more sophisticated scheme than that example can achieve this K over 1 plus 1 over half plus 1 over K, dot, 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 1 over K, which is roughly K over log K symbols per time slot. Surprisingly, even with delayed information, you can get a rate first, which is greater than 1. Moreover, if K is large, then this number is pretty close to K. So this is a rather surprising result to us. Okay. So what's going on here? I have 10 minutes left, perfect timing. Thank you very much. So remember, when there is no information, what degree of freedom, how many symbols can you get if there's no channel information? If you have 2 antennas and 2 users, you get 1. If you have 3 antennas and 3 users, what do you get? You have no information, right? How do you be informed? You can't be informed. You can only broadcast to everybody and send to 1 user at a time. So in other words, without any channel information, you're always stuck at 1 symbol per time slot. With channel information, you get K symbols per time slot. With delay channel information, which is this result, you get K over log K. So much larger than 1, and not as good as K, but not too far away from K. Okay, so let's look back and think about what we've done with this feedback scheme that I came up with. To do that, let's think about what's the role of feedback in communication. There are 2 main roles of feedback in communication. 1, ARQ. I have not heard you. Can you repeat? That's ARQ. That's feedback. Number 2, channel prediction, as I mentioned already. I feed back the current estimate of the channel. You do prediction using that information. Now we have a new way of using feedback. What is this new way? This new way is exploiting psi information. So let's look at the picture again. I claim that what this is doing is exploiting psi information. So what's going on here? Okay. In the first time slot, I cannot beamform because I don't know the current channel information, right? Cannot beamform. Cannot beamform means that whatever I send will spill to the other guy. And what is this spill link called? Interference. In other words, what I'm sending, I really want to send to this guy. If I knew the channel perfectly, then I could remove the interference here, no interference, by beamforming to one guy. But because I don't know the instantaneous current channel information, A2 is somehow received. So A2 is interference. In other words, it signals that receiver B does not want, but he gets anyway. And that's a bad thing. Okay? Interference is bad. However, what this scheme does is to say that, it's bad, but let's still try to make use of it anyway. So now instead of thinking about it as a bad interference, I think of it as sign information. In other words, this is information this guy receives that is not of direct use to him, but through further processing can be made useful. How? Well, let's go back to the picture. By doing feedback of the channel state, I can reconstruct A2 at the transmitter. I can reconstruct B1, and by sending the sum, I can deliver A2 plus B1, and now the sign information becomes indirectly useful by decoding A2, which is the real stuff that you're interested in. So by doing feedback, the transmitter knows what the sign information is. Through further processing, you make the sign information useful. That's the trick. Okay? So now we can pull the three concepts together: interference, sign information, and feedback. First, because wireless is fundamentally a broadcast nature. In other words, whatever you send, everybody in your vicinity can hear you. That's a bad thing because it creates interference. It is the broadcast nature of wireless that creates interference. On the other hand, interference can be viewed as half full by viewing it as something positive, some sign information. But this sign information without feedback is useless because the transmitter does not know what the sign information is and therefore cannot help the receiver to make use of it. So the third step is to use feedback of the previous channel in order that the sign information can be exploited. So now we have it: interference, sign information, and feedback. And the optimal scheme leaves no money on the table. Why? Because the sign information that was received is actually money on the table. It's a signal that you have received already. If you don't make good use of it, then you're leaving money on the table. By doing the feedback and by doing it optimally, I'm squeezing the most out of it. Okay? All right. So this sign information is actually a much broader idea than this particular example of feedback I talked about. For example, Sachin Kati has a very nice example in his sitcom paper in 2006, building on the network coding result, which says that using broadcast and sign information, you can actually do good. So here's an example that he had. This is a part of a multi-hop network, okay? And you have this node wants to send to this node a symbol, say A. And this guy wants to send a symbol B to this guy. So you're going through this middle hop here, okay? Now, so this guy sends A, but unfortunately creates interference at this other guy, okay? And therefore, this guy also got A. But that is interference because now it precludes it to use that time slot to do something useful for it. Similarly, this guy sends to B will create a sign interference because of the broadcast nature to this node. And therefore, you have this situation. So the interference is bad because it is preventing these two nodes from doing something useful. But now that I've received the interference anyway, let me think of it positively as sign information. Okay? And therefore, I send A plus B so that simultaneously these two nodes get A plus B. And by subtracting the interference that it already received, which is now sign information, it got B, which is what it wants. and this guy got A, which is what he wants. Okay? So this is the use of sign information. What we have here, you can think of, interpret as this picture, but with channel gains thrown into the picture and feedback to do something useful with it. Actually, since I'm now at the Technion, I should really mention this, okay? The use of sign information has actually been advocated even before this work at the Technion. And the problem that they look at is called index coding problem. So the index coding problem is roughly this. You have a bunch of nodes which already receive some sign information, and you want to optimize your transmission schedule, broadcast schedule, to fully exploit the sign information, okay? That is the index coding problem. The problem that we have is sort of a dynamic version of that, where not only you have this sign information to use, but you are also worried about how to create the appropriate sign information in the first place. So it's a dynamic version of that. Okay, so let me conclude. 3 concepts, 1 line. Interference is a central barrier, and the community is generating new approaches to mitigate interference. Okay. Feedback is a key enabler for these approaches. The new role of feedback emerges from this example I discussed, which is exploiting sign information. Optimal use of feedback leaves no money on the table. Thank you.